I want to impress upon the Prime Minister the decision of the people of Scotland in the 2016 referendum and what she must now do to respect their wishes. In 2014, the Scottish Tory leader, Ruth Davidson, during the Scottish independence referendum, promised that voting no meant that Scotland remained in the EU. But Scotland didn't vote for a Tory Brexit, and we're being dragged out of the European Union by Westminster against our will. And yet the Prime Minister talks about this being a family of nations and Scotland's voice would be respected. Where is the respect for the views and the wishes of the people of Scotland that have demonstrably said that they wish to remain as EU citizens? I'll give way on that.
I'm grateful, the right honourable gentleman, for giving way. Isn't it, in fact, a reality that in polling in Scotland, the European Union remains more popular with the Scottish people than the United Kingdom? And that is something that should be heard loud and clear in this place. The European Union is more popular with Scots than the United Kingdom.
Well, indeed, that is correct, and of course it's little surprise because the European institutions show respect to the people of Scotland, something this government doesn't. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised a no vote would see Scotland's future as an equal partner. Now, what do we see? Westminster now taking powers off the Scottish Parliament against the wishes of the Scottish Parliament and against the wishes of the Scottish people. You know, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it because I hear from a sedentary position the member for Stirling saying, what powers? Now, obviously, he has forgotten that he voted through the Withdrawal Act that interfered with the powers of the Scottish Parliament that were laid down in the Scotland Act. Powers over fishing, powers over the environment, powers over agriculture, and the Tories sat back and allowed the Scottish Parliament to be emasculated. And the 13 Scottish Tories acted against the interests of the people of Scotland as they've done time and time again. Mr. Speaker, the Westminster campaign against Scottish independence said that high street banks were making plans to leave Scotland. Yet now, because of this government's Brexit, Standard Life Aberdeen is setting up a hub in Dublin, and Lloyds Bank is looking at a Berlin base.
Independent Ireland.
And even last week, during Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister tried to tell me to drop the SNP policy of independence. But yet, Mr. Speaker, in June 2017, the leader of the Scottish Tories, Ruth Davidson, said, "Let me be clear, nobody, not me, not anyone, is expecting the SNP to give up on independence. That's what it believes in, and it's a perfectly honourable position to take." Mr. Speaker, a perfectly honourable position to take. Let me be very clear. Scotland must no longer be left at the mercy of events. Whatever happens here, the SNP will not be dropping its policy of independence. Turmoil and hardship this Tory government tries to drag our nation through, Scotland will and must have the right to determine its own future. Mr. Speaker, to choose to be an independent nation within the European Union. Now, I can see members shaking their heads, because they're running scared. Like the Prime Minister, they fear they would lose an independence referendum. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Scottish people are sick and tired of being told that what the Prime Minister wants them to do. Scotland needs are much more important than what the Prime Minister wants. Scotland needs the power to take its own decisions. That's the only way we can stop the Tories driving us off the cliff edge and into disaster. How happily give way.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He made the point that the Scottish people should have what the Scottish people want. Did the Scottish people indicate their want to remain a part of the United Kingdom?
I can only assume that the honourable lady wasn't listening to what I said in my remarks, because the fundamental fact is that we were promised that we would stay in the European Union. And what the Tories find it very difficult to accept,
David Cameron,
that when the Scottish National Party went to the people of Scotland in 2016, in our manifesto, we asked for the right to go back to the people of Scotland if there was a material change of circumstances. And, Mr Speaker, that's exactly the position that we're in today. There is a majority in the Scottish Parliament for a referendum on Scottish independence. And yet what we hear from the Conservatives is now is not the time, disrespecting the mandate that the people of Scotland gave to its elected parliamentarians. And I'll say this to the Conservative benches. If our First Minister calls for a Section 30 authority based on democracy, then this House must respect the will of the Scottish people to its elected parliamentarians.
EU shows respect.
Mr Speaker, the only way to stop the punitive cuts from universal credit and end the hostile environment that sends talented workers away from our shores. The vote on the immigration bill is just the latest indication of Westminster voting against Scotland's national interest. We embrace free movement of people. We welcome those that choose to make a future for themselves in Scotland. We thank those who wish to add to our cultural diversity. This place wants to slam the door shut and pull up the drawbridge, to retreat into isolation. And we watch the official opposition go through trials and tribulations as to whether it should be opposing a narrow-minded immigration policy from this government. Mr Speaker, Labour has lost its moral compass. Then we have the Scots Tory MPs meekly going through the lobbies. Theresa's lobby for the supporting legislation that will damage Scottish industries and our public services, damaging Scotland's ability to attract labour and to grow our economy. The Scottish Tories acting against our national interest, Labour stuck on the sidelines. Mr Speaker, a majority of MSPs and Scottish MPs returned at the last two elections support holding an independence referendum in the circumstances we now found ourselves. Scotland will not be ignored. The UK Government has ignored the views of the people of Scotland. Our Parliament, our Scottish Parliament, has already overwhelmingly rejected the Prime Minister's deal. Today, Mr Speaker, SNP MPs will vote in support of that mandate from Scotland's Parliament, and we will continue to vote down the blindfold Brexit deal that will drive our economy off the cliff edge. Mr Speaker, there is just 59 days to go until Brexit Day, and that deal on the table is done. It's been dead in the water now for months, yet the Prime Minister is still seeking to run down the clock and push it through this House. This is incredibly reckless and risky. How can the Prime Minister be allowed to behave in such a manner?
Quite right.
The Prime Minister has no hope of being able to control this House. She cannot even control her own disunited party.
Correct.
And for anyone who may still have been in any doubt, we're hearing this mess today because the party on these benches gambled on our economic future over a decade-long internal feud in the Tory party. They should all hang their heads in shame. Quite simply, the party opposite is not fit to govern because it has a track record of putting its fractured party interest before all our national interests. Not what the Prime Minister calls the national interest, but the interest of all the nations that make up the UK. I'll give way. Is there any water?
Thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. On the matter of national interest, if we talk about Scottish national interest for a second, I totally respect the SNP's position to always want to campaign for independence, because that is what the SNP does. But would the right honourable gentleman also agree that in 2017, in the general election in 2017, the majority of voters in Scotland, 56% of voters in Scotland voted for parties that were committed to delivering on Brexit, and the percentage of vote for parties against Brexit actually reduced?
Order! Extraordinary behaviour by the Honourable Lady, who's a very illustrious doctor. I can't believe that she rants from a sedentary position in the middle of her surgeries in that way. It's unbecoming of somebody of her status and high esteem in the House of Commons. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Of course, we come to this place under the rules which are laid down for us. And by the rules of elections in this country, the SNP won 35 of the 59 seats for Westminster. There is a majority for the Scottish National Party in this Parliament. The Conservatives could only dream of having a majority. You know, a Prime Minister that went to the country on the basis that she was going to come back with an overwhelming majority. She came back with a bloody nose and a minority administration, relying on the votes of the DUP, where they're handing over vast sums of money in order to keep themselves in any kind of power. Mr Speaker, today the Prime Minister faces a vote on her motion, with the threat of resignations overshadowing the debate. We know that senior ministers have refused to rule out resigning if no deal is not taken off the table. And, Mr Speaker, we know that politicians play a slow game. Time is actually running out for businesses. The Honourable Member for Luton, the Business Minister, has said that the Prime Minister's attempt to put pressure on moderate MPs to back her deal to avoid a disorderly Brexit was a disaster for business. The Chief Executive of Airbus, Tom Enders, said that business could be forced to redirect future investments in the event of a no deal. And the Chief Executive of Siemens, Jürgen Meyer, said that the thing all of us won't be able to manage is no deal. And now we hear from the British Retail Consortium warning of food shortages, warning of empty shelves. Just dwell on this. Sainsbury's, Asda, Marks and Spencer, the Co-op, Waitrose, Cost Cutter, all warning of not being able to have sufficient supplies, of shelves lying empty. Mr Speaker, we are used to seeing images of empty shelves in war-torn or failing states. There is now a real threat of empty shelves happening in the United Kingdom in less than 2 months. Still, the Prime Minister refuses to take no deal off the table. And I point the finger of blame at the Prime Minister and her government. The primary responsibility of any government is to protect its citizens. We have a massive failure of leadership. Food shortages and shortages of medicine that would be a response to the failure of this government if they were to happen. There is genuine and heartfelt fear and alarm from some of our biggest businesses.
Can I just ask then, what would be his objection to giving the Prime Minister the ability to do what is in effect a probing amendment with the EU, to see what they're prepared to give way, to help deliver the deal that he would like to see happen? What would be his objection? What is so objectionable in this new Amendment N? Can he give any reason for not supporting it?
Mr Speaker, this is a complete fantasy, and all of us play with the Good Friday Agreement at our peril. The peace in Ireland has been hard won, and the European Union has reached agreement with the UK on the Prime Minister's draft deal on the basis of making sure that we enshrine the Good Friday Agreement. None of us should be playing with fire and seeking to unwind the Good Friday Agreement, because that's the effect of what would happen. It is the height of irresponsibility to go down that road. I'm going to come on to the backstop in more detail later on, and I will cover it. The Prime Minister could make it clear today that she will bring measures in front of Parliament to rule out no deal. Prime Minister, that is in all our national interest. Remove the threat of supply shortages. There is a threat to food safety. Remove it today.
On that point, I'm grateful for my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it also a fact, in addition to all of those companies who've issued these warnings, that the Road Haulage Association have been saying for over a year that this is madness to actually look at a no-deal situation, and that actually what will happen is that those people at the furthest reaches of the supply chain, my constituents, his constituents, will be those who are worst affected by this no-deal scenario that the government are hanging over the heads of this Parliament and the people of all the nations of the UK.
My honourable friend is quite correct. We have integrated supply chains on the basis of the single market, which has been in place since the 1990s, and there are very real and very real threats that exist to food supply on the basis of no deal. It is a height of irresponsibility for the government not to rule that out. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, because he's making a really powerful case about what no deal could really look like. And amongst that, he said that there could be food shortages and, crucially, that food prices could go up. Does he share my anger, really, with the voices behind me that he perhaps didn't hear? But when he was talking about food prices going up and the fact there could be food shortages, the people behind me were saying, well, let them go to the chippy instead. No. Does he share my anger about the way in which our constituencies would be affected by a no deal?
I'm sorry to hear that that was a remark that was made. And, you know, this is a really important debate, and I think there's a responsibility that we take these issues seriously, each and every one of us. Mr. Speaker, I want to make some progress, and I will take some interventions later on. The Prime Minister will do nothing. She remains in office, but not in power. Transfixed like a rabbit caught in the headlights. A failure to deliver leadership. To use a food analogy, the Prime Minister is past her sell-by date. Focused on backing MPs into a corner with options only of her deal or no deal on the table is ridiculous, and I urge members to resist the pressure. We cannot allow the UK Government to run down the clock and bully MPs into backing this terrible deal. Pretending there is a binary choice between her woeful deal and a catastrophic no deal is completely reckless. Mr. Speaker, it is false. It is not the case, and members must have the courage to stand up against that. We have the power in this place to send this shambolic deal packing. We have the power to amend this deal to protect all our citizens. We have the power to end this charade. So members on all benches, have courage, have conviction, and have some integrity. Do not send our economy off the cliff edge with this deal or with no deal.
I'm grateful he's given way. He's made some very powerful points, quoting the voices of business, saying that there should be no deal. And I also believe there should be no deal, and I believe there should be a deal. But does he also accept that those same voices of business, giving evidence to select committees of this House, have said, for the very reasons he's giving that there should be no deal, that we should be supporting the Prime Minister's deal with the European Union because it provides for an orderly and smooth Brexit?
I'm afraid from the businesses that I speak to, they recognise the benefits of the single market and the customs union. Yes, there is no Brexit option which is going to leave us better off than the status quo. And I'm going to come on to the economic arguments about this, because the job of all of us is to protect the economic interests of our citizens. And Brexit is going to lead to a situation where there are going to be job losses throughout the United Kingdom. We've already seen the news from the European Medicines Agency, from the European Banking Authority. They've gone. We've seen the news from Jaguar Land Rover and others. And it is the height of irresponsibility of politicians on the basis of ideology to threaten the economic circumstances of their citizens. Because that is what is happening, because of the Tory party myopic view of Brexit and leading all these nations out of the European Union. I'll take one last intervention, then I must move on.
Gentlemen, for giving way. But may I gently say to him, we will soon have only 3 hours left of debate, and there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 amendments, and many backbenchers, I'm not one of them, who wish to make a speech. And I will tell him, I look forward to joining him in the lobbies this evening on many of these amendments, and many of us are grateful for his support.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for her intervention. I have to suggest to her that it is the Prime Minister that sets the timeline for this debate. And what I'm doing is I'm speaking as the leader of the third party, as I'm entitled to do so. And I might ask the question, since it's been raised, is where is the Prime Minister and where is the leader of the opposition? One last time, and then I must make progress.
I thank him for giving way. Going back to the intervention Ron Wimmer for Stirling, is it not insane to talk about an orderly Brexit by agreeing to the Prime Minister's so-called deal? Because all it does is put stuff into a transition period for so that period of time where we don't know what's happening. And even the Prime Minister is now arguing she needs to go back and change the backstop. So there is no orderly Brexit and there is no deal to actually agree.
Indeed, and of course, the government likes to talk about an implementation period. And of course, you have to beg the question, what are we implementing? Because the only thing the government's come forward with is a deal to leave the European Union. And the future relationship between the United Kingdom of the European Union is to be left to the future, and there is no knowing how long that will take. There is supposedly, according to the papers in front of us, a 2-year period, but many believe that it could take 5 years, perhaps even longer than that. There is no certainty with what this government is bringing forward. Mr. Speaker, we have still not seen any economic assessment of the government's deal. Either the Prime Minister hasn't instructed her government to conduct one, or the reality of the hardship of her deal will bring is why the government will not publish it. Mr. Speaker, we are being asked here again to vote for a blindfold Brexit, to sleepwalk into the future, without the facts and analysis from this government of what the deal means for our economy. In fact, it is an insult to this House and each and every member in it. I say to the Prime Minister, and I hope she reads about it in Hansard since she's not here, that will she publish the details of the impact of her deal on the economy and contrast it with the status quo. Mr. Speaker, if the government refused to end their shroud of secrecy and publish an economic analysis, let me remind the House of the facts. Analysis by Scottish Government officials found that by 2030, under a free trade agreement, GDP would be £9 billion lower than if we stayed in the EU, equivalent to a cost of £1,600 per person in Scotland. The Bank of England has warned that crashing out of the EU without a deal would be worse than the 2008 financial crisis.
Absolutely right.
With house prices plummeting by as much as 30%, with the Bank of England rate hiking to 4%. Brexit uncertainty is already damaging our economy to the tune of £600 per household per year. Jobs are at risk. Investment is at risk. Our economy is set to be weaker and smaller. Mr. Speaker, how can any members in this House countenance that? We have been elected to protect our citizens and punish them. Brexit will inflict undue pain across all parts of the United Kingdom. With this deal or no deal, our constituents are set to suffer. We cannot allow that to happen. Brexiteers argue that we will be okay without the internal markets of the EU. Some Brexiteers are in cloud cuckoo land, harping back to the past. Well, I say to them, it's over. Let's look at the facts. The UK's trade with County Cork is worth almost as much as its entire trade with South Africa. Wow. Trade with Ireland is worth more to the UK than trade with India, Japan, New Zealand and Australia put together. And as Scotland's place in Europe demonstrated, even if the UK signed agreements with the 10 biggest non-EEA single-country trading partners, including the USA, China and Canada, a process that would take many years, this would only cover 37% of Scotland's current exports compared to 43% that go to the EU. The idea that we will be better off outside the European Union is a fallacy.
I thank the right member for giving way. If trade volumes are the principal determinant of policy in this area, wouldn't he agree that given 61% of Scotland's exports comes to the rest of the UK and only 17% to the European Union, the most important union for Scotland is the United Kingdom?
Well, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I find that remarkable. There we have a threat to the people of Scotland from one of the Conservatives in this House. I thought that we believed in free trade. We're not talking about having any barriers with trade with the island of Ireland. Why on earth would there be any barriers to trade with Scotland? And it's about time that the Conservatives stop threatening the people of Scotland, because that's exactly what you're doing. Mr. Speaker, it really is demoralising to stand here today listening to the merry-go-round of Tory infighting and Labour fence-sitting. There is no leadership from these two parties. I genuinely feel for those across the UK who voted for the Tories and Labour and have been so badly let down. Now their cowardice threatens us all. It threatens our livelihoods, yes, but it also threatens our culture, our communities and the type of society we could be. Our cultural ties with Europe run deep throughout Scotland. The old alliance is perhaps best known of Scotland's ancient ties. France and Scotland enjoy deep cultural ties and have a mutual cultural statement of intent which the Scottish Government signed in 2013. We share a rich Celtic history of storytelling and traditional music and a great love of piping. Such was the wealth of intellectual exchange between Scotland and Europe that in Kirkwall's library in the 1680s there were books from Amsterdam, from Krakow, from Brussels, from Rostock, Paris, Leipzig and dozens of others. Our relationship with Germany dates back to 1297, when William Wallace wrote to the martyrs of Lübeck and Hamburg declaring Scotland open for business. And in case members are unaware, immigration was around long before the EU, and it will be around for a lot long after as well. It is, after all, a global phenomenon.
Point of order, Mr. David T.C. Davis.
Of clarification, the honourable member just suggested that there was a relationship with Germany going back to the 1200s. Germany didn't exist in the 1200s, Mr. Speaker.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his historical exegesis, from which the leader of the Scottish National Party can choose either to think he can benefit or can't benefit. That's a matter for him. It's not a matter for the chair. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I'll just treat it with the contempt it deserves. By 1914, Scotland had nearly 25,000 European residents, who mostly came from southern and eastern Europe. Between 1891 and 1901, 25% of the immigrants came from Italy. The majority of the immigrants came mainly from Russia and Poland and settled mainly in the west of Scotland. They were welcome, just as migrants coming to Scotland today are. Almost 50% of the male immigrants worked in coal mining and about 12% in tailoring, while most of the Italian migrants became more involved with restaurants and retail. Mr. Speaker, we have so much to lose from Brexit and nothing to gain. I plead to members, you can change course. History will remember your act of courage. Today, members have an opportunity to preserve our opportunities with Europe, the cultural links, our shared values, our economic ties, and our solidarity in coming together to find a way forward. Mr. Speaker, voting for the SNP amendment will respect the votes of the people of Scotland in 2016. They must not and will not be dragged out of the EU against their will. Scotland's voice has been ignored for too long. We on these benches will continue to press for the best possible outcome for the people of Scotland. If our voice is not respected, if Scotland is continuously silenced and sidelined by this Tory government, this place will not be forgiven. The days of Westminster having a veto over Scotland's future are over. Only as an independent country can Scotland thrive, and friends, we will thrive. Discussion today about ditching the backstop are just internal Tory matters. They can fight and squabble, but the EU is united and clear. They will not accept any changes to the backstop in the withdrawal agreement.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for the right honourable gentleman for giving clear. One of the things that I think the Prime Minister didn't quite get or convey or understand or forgot is the backstop is a compromise. It's a compromise based on the fantasies of the technologies that she's promised are going to come. If she's actually true and right about these fantasies, then she doesn't need to worry about the backstop. And, you know, if they were there, if the technology was there that currently be used on the Swiss border, I suggest that the Europeans have used the backstop because they know the fantasies are exactly that.
The right honourable gentleman is approaching his brief peroration. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Well, if you want to hear more, I'm happy to carry on. But my honourable friend is absolutely correct. And I would say to the Prime Minister, there are two ways that you can fix the backstop. The first is that we stay in the European Union. But the second one is you stay in the single market and the customs union, because that's the fundamental point. That is the only way that you can remove any need for the backstop in the agreement. The Taoiseach is clear. The backstop isn't up for grabs. So why don't members get real? Why doesn't the Prime Minister stop fudging it? The Prime Minister needs to own up to her own delayed mess and extend Article 50, and to do it today. It is the only way, Mr. Speaker, to give this place the time to find a solution.
Order with immediate effect.